Welcome to your fourth Latin lesson. I've summarized the major points in the first part of this. I made an improvement in the technical aspect of this insofar as my pages won't be cut off at unusual places anymore. I've improved the way that I import the documents, so I hope that's an aesthetic improvement that'll make the podcasts a little bit more watchable. I hope they weren't a problem for you in the past. I didn't hear any feedback or constructive criticism about the podcast so far, but I welcome that. Otherwise, I'm going to assume that everything is working for you and makes pretty good sense for you. I title this one The Big Picture because the first part is going to give you the basic fundamentals of Latin that at this point I think you are prepared to handle and to understand in some detail. The terms still may be relatively new to you, but at this point the terms should be pretty familiar. The mechanics and the process should be pretty familiar. And I want to get into a really thorough review of this. For some of you, it might be very obvious and easy at this point. For others of you, it may really come together in this lesson. And this is an important one, though. I think this is a point where, for many of you, the information that you've been learning will be consolidated. The first overall point, which you already should know with great ease, is that nouns, pronouns, and adjectives, those are three parts of speech. I put them as the first three parts of speech, are declined by adding endings, the proper word for that is suffixes, on to their theme or to their stem. Your book generally refers to it as a stem. Verbs are conjugated by adding suffixes to their theme or stem. Again, the book prefers the term stem. There are 5 types of nouns and 5 types of verbs. That makes it pretty easy to remember. There's an unusual thing, though, about the nomenclature or the names of these 5 different types. For nouns, you have a first, second, third, fourth, and fifth declension. The different types of nouns are called declensions. For verbs, they're called conjugations, but they have a funny numbering system. It goes first, second, third, third I, and then fourth. It's still 5 different types, but the verbs have the name third and third I thrown in there, which is not exactly logical, but you'll understand it when we get to that point, and it can be easily explained. If you don't understand these basic points right here, you need to contact me, you need to get onto Skype with me, and I need to sit down with you and explain to you these basics. The types of nouns are crucial to your understanding. The types of verbs are crucial to your understanding. Make sure you understand this general process. As far as nouns go, a normal first declension noun, the first category of noun, has a lexical entry, that is to say, it looks the following way in a dictionary. The lexical entry is the way that the word looks in the dictionary. Your book should list them, and all dictionaries will list them as the nominative singular and the genitive singular. And then it will provide the gender for you, which in this case happens to be feminine, and then it should provide for you the definition, girl in this case. That's what a Latin dictionary looks like. It will often be abbreviated in the following way: puella, puellae. And you can figure out that the stem is up to the L and the endings are after that. Europa, Europae. Again, you can see where the endings and the stem begin. In addition to first declension nouns, by this point the book is starting to slowly introduce to you second declension type of nouns. Their lexical entry looks like this: amicus, amici. Again, your book will generally abbreviate it amicus, amici, or dominus, domini. It's crucial, however, that you remember that there are other types of second declension noun. The first declension noun, back up here, is quite simple. It has one style of entry only. all of the first declension nouns end in A in the nominative singular and AE in the genitive singular. Second declension nouns are more complicated. You can see that this ends in US, the nominative singular, and this ends in US, the nominative singular, and the genitive singular here ends in I, and the genitive singular here ends in I. However, when you look down at these next examples of second declension noun, you can see that puer and pueri do not have the same pattern of endings. Puer, for example, does not end in US. Magister does not end in US. And donum does not end in US. Among the second class, or the second declension of nouns, there is this starter variety that the book uses most often. And then there are some subcategories, like puer, which you'll come to see is slightly different than magister. To your eye right now, they may look identical. And then finally, there is donum, which is an entirely different category. These first examples are all masculine, with donum and all the nouns that look like donum in the dictionary being a second category of neuters, all of which fall into the second declension category. So these are all subcategories of the second declension. The declension, or the process of adding an ending onto a noun, or a suffix onto a noun. I want to describe now, letter C is the declension of a first or second declension noun. I want to take you through that process in great detail. In order to decline a noun in the first or second declension, you're going to follow these steps. Step number 1, you take the genitive singular from the lexical entry. The genitive singular is the second thing in the dictionary. Now that's a somewhat annoying little feature of this Explain Everything app. I don't know what this is supposed to be, a lightsaber. I probably won't use it often, but here it is for emphasis in this podcast. When you decline, that is to say, when you add a suffix onto a first or a second declension noun, what you need to do is take the second thing in the lexical entry, the second thing in the dictionary for a noun. When you're doing that for a first declension noun, you're going to drop the AE from the end of that. When you're doing it for a second declension noun, you're going to drop the I. So if we take the word puella in the dictionary, it'll look something like this, puella, puelli. And you understand that this second part of the entry is just an abbreviation for puelli, like this. And what I need you to do consistently is to take not puella when you find the first thing in the dictionary, but I need you to take the second thing that you find in the dictionary and drop the AE. That is going to give you the stem from which you will work in order to decline this, in order to add the suffixes onto a noun. Although it may not seem necessary right now to take the second thing in the dictionary, you will find that as you move into the third declension, it is necessary to take the second thing in the dictionary. And taking the second thing in the dictionary, you'll see, will be a theme of this podcast and of Latin in general. It's not a hard and fast rule for all of Latin, but in this podcast, you'll see that it shows up again and again and again. So it's an easy way to remember what to do. You take the second thing in the dictionary. If it's a second declension noun, for example, amicus, amici, again, I don't want you to take the first thing in the dictionary. I want you to take the second thing in the dictionary, and I want you to drop the I. That will give you your stem, just like puel is the stem for the first declension. Once you have this stem, then you're going to add the case endings. Here are the case endings for the first declension. Here are the case endings for the second declension. So, to puel, you will add A, and then AE. and then AE again for the dative, and then AM, and then a long A for the ablative. That's for a first declension noun in the singular. The first ending is the nominative, the second is the genitive, the third is the dative, the fourth is the accusative, and the fifth is the ablative. That list of nominative, genitive, dative, accusative, and ablative needs to be memorized and practiced by you at this point. You need to be writing out charts like Puella, like I just showed you, over and over and over again to master this and to make it second nature. If you don't, this class will become almost impossible for you very quickly. This podcast is about the basic tools you need to succeed in this class and move forward in Latin. For the second declension, the process is very much the same. You've taken the second thing in the dictionary, over here, for example, amic, and then you would add to the ending amic us, or amici, or amico, or amicum, or amico. Very simple process. That's all you need to do to decline a first declension or a second declension noun in the singular. So far, this has just been the singular. The plural, however, is no different of a process. You take the same exact stem, for example, let me point it out to you by means of the lightsaber. You take the same stem right here, or the same stem for a second declension noun right here, and then you just add the plural nominative, the plural genitive, the plural dative, the plural accusative, or the plural ablative again. For the second declension, here's the plural nominative, the plural genitive, the plural dative, the plural accusative, and the plural ablative. Very simple process. It would be puellae, or it would be amici. And you'll note that some of these endings are repeated. Here's the I repeated with the I. Here's the AE repeated with the AE twice. That's annoying. It may be confusing to you at first, but it will be rare where you will find it difficult to distinguish between these different forms in context of a sentence. We haven't worked much with complicated sentences or long sentences at this point, but you have to trust me on this. When it comes down to reading Latin sentences, it will be very difficult for you to confuse the AE for the genitive singular with the AE for the dative and the AE for the nominative plural. The process continues. Puel is the stem that you found by taking the second thing in the dictionary and dropping the AE for the first declension. And the amic is the same over here. You just add the different endings onto the stem that you found by dropping the I, in this case, from the stem of the second declension noun. The pattern is repeated. It's the nominative, followed by the genitive, the dative, the accusative, and the ablative. That's almost all there is to declining nouns. You must master this point because the class will continue with the declension of the third declension, the fourth declension, the fifth declension, and a variety of different adjectives. They all basically follow this procedure, and they all basically follow this same pattern. If you get lost at this point, just contact me because it is crucial and fundamental to the rest of the class. Moving on to adjectives, there are two major categories of adjective. Remember how there was a first, second, third, fourth, and fifth declension of noun. They're all different categories of noun or classes of noun. There's only two major categories of adjective, but there are many subcategories. Right now in the book, you only know the variety that I will refer to as the 2-1-2 variety. I call it the 2-1-2 variety because the lexical entry, and remember the lexical entry is the way that it looks in the dictionary, The lexical entry for a 212 adjective looks like this, if I write it out in full. As usual, your book and dictionaries will tend to abbreviate it in the following way. Which is frustrating for the beginning student, but you do have to master it. They will abbreviate it by only showing the ending for the second and the third parts of that lexical entry. There's 3 parts to the lexical entry, but the dictionaries tend to abbreviate those. I call these 212 adjectives because the first form, bonus, looks just like a second declension noun that you just practiced, amicus. And bonus is declined exactly the same as that second declension noun. It's a second declension masculine. Remember, adjectives agree with the nouns they modify in case, number, and gender, so they have to have all 3 genders. Therefore, the lexical entry consists of the masculine form, bonus, the feminine form, bona, and the neuter form, bonum. Bonus happens to be just like a second declension noun, amicus. Bona happens to be just like a first declension feminine noun, like puella, and it's declined exactly the same as puella. And then bonum happens to be declined exactly the same as a second declension neuter noun. You saw that briefly in this podcast in the example given above of donum. Right now in the book, this last form, this neuter form, is not one of the major priorities, but I do want to expose you to it now so that when you see all 3 forms, it isn't a surprise to you and you aren't lost when you all of a sudden learn new information. I'm giving you the full picture now. I called this lesson the big picture so that you understand what's going on in the language without any big surprises. If you master the material in this podcast, everything else in Latin is really just an expansion of this lesson. So again, here's some neat typewritten examples of the way adjectives look in the dictionary. This is called their lexical entry. I'll refer to that from now on in the rest of this class. I want you to know the lexical entry for a noun, the lexical entry for an adjective, and the lexical entry for a verb eventually. You can see that they have a masculine form for an adjective, a feminine form, and a neuter form. The masculine form always comes first, the feminine second, and the neuter third. That will always apply in this class. And you can see that these are all the nominative singulars, and the nominative singular of the respective adjectives. Stultus would be used for a boy or any masculine noun. Stulta would be used for any feminine noun. Stultum would be used for any neuter noun, because adjectives have to agree with the nouns they modify in case, number, and gender. It's a crucial point and often a problem for students. Now I want to teach you to conjugate the masculine and feminine forms of those nouns. I'm circling them right now, the masculine and feminine forms. As I said in the last slide, you don't really have to know the neuter forms right now, but I want you to be aware of them so that when you learn them, they're not coming out of nowhere. In order to conjugate, I used the wrong word right there. In order to decline, the masculine and feminine forms of adjectives, you follow the following 3 steps. You'll note that it's a very similar process to what you just learned for nouns. If you learn how to do nouns, adjectives require almost no new information, no new skills. Here's what you do. When you find an adjective in the dictionary, it's going to look like this: iratus, irata, iratum. If you take the second thing in the dictionary, which in this case written out in full, not abbreviated, would be errata. You will drop the A from that, as it says in the instructions number 2. Now you have what's called your stem or your theme, I-R-A-T, for errata up here. Then you add the A to the end of that if you want to decline it for a feminine noun. You add the erratai if you want to do it for the genitive feminine noun in the singular. The AE again for the dative, the AM for the accusative singular, and the long A for the ablative singular. What I've just shown you is the declension of the feminine singular form of the adjective, angry in this case. You would use this nominative form if you wanted to modify the subject of the sentence. That would also be in the nominative, if that subject were feminine and singular. This is an adjective that would go with a nominative singular feminine because it is also nominative singular feminine. If you had a noun you wanted to modify or describe in the genitive singular feminine, you would use the genitive form. If you had a noun that you wanted to modify in the dative singular feminine, you would use the dative, and obviously the pattern continues with the accusative and the ablative singular. The same applies to the masculine forms. You take the IRAT, which is the stem or theme, and then you add the us, or the I, the O, the or the O. These, however, the masculine forms can only be used for a masculine singular nominative or a genitive singular masculine or a dative singular masculine, an accusative singular masculine, or an ablative singular masculine. No surprises down here with a plural. All you do for the feminine plural is take the same stem, IRAT, and add the appropriate endings, AE, or ARUM, IS, AS, or IS. These feminine plural forms would be used with the appropriately matching noun, the nominative, the genitive, the dative, the accusative, or the ablative. And then the same is true for the masculine, eratus, that's the wrong form. Sorry about that, I lost control of the app altogether there. You have, this form would not be eratus, but erati. And the next one would be, sorry, I'll cross that out, erati. The next one would be eratorum. Then eratis, eratos, and eratis. That's the process of declining the plural masculine adjective. Make that one neater. I don't seem to be able to erase it all together though. Had to erase the whole thing and start from scratch, but just so you see more neatly, it would be erati for the nominative plural. As I pointed out earlier, you'll learn the neuter adjectives later. Every adjective has a masculine, a feminine, and a neuter form, but you've only really learned the nominative, masculine, and the feminine forms so far, and how to decline both of those. The neuter, this third example down here, will come in a later chapter, in a later lesson. So that's the gist for nouns and adjectives. Here's the summary in the big picture for verbs. Again, there are 5 types, and the first type that you would start with logically is the first conjugation. Like nouns and adjectives, there's a regular lexical entry for a normal first conjugation verb. You'll find out later that there are some irregularities. But a normal first conjugation verb looks like this: habito, habitare, habitavi, habitatus, habitata, habitatum. That's the full lexical entry with no abbreviations. The book is going to abbreviate it: habito, habitare, habitavi, habitatum. I don't know, I suppose that saves some space or some energy for the typist, but really, I find that to be a frustrating abbreviation. It's very confusing to an elementary student. I found that myself when I was first learning Latin, and I found it for the last 15 or so years when I've been teaching students. You do have to confront it. It is the reality, but I think it is unfortunate. How you determine whether a verb, and I wrote the wrong thing here again. It's so easy to get stuck on declensions or conjugations. How you determine that a verb is first conjugation or second conjugation. First conjugation. Excuse my typographical errors here. Or second conjugation is by the second thing in the dictionary. Now, for the third time, you'll see that the second thing in the dictionary matters. So when you look at habito, look at the full written out form right here. Habito, habitare, habitavi, habitatus, habitata, habitatum. You look at the second thing in the dictionary, before the letter RE is the letter A. First conjugation verbs have an A before the RE in the second thing in the dictionary. It's called the second principal part. A normal second conjugation verb has a lexical entry that looks like this: moneo, monera, monui, monitus, monita, monitum. The book abbreviates this as moneo, monera, monui, monitum. You'll even see different books abbreviate this differently. That's another frustrating point of this abbreviation system. Nonetheless, you can see that there's a difference. Before the RE in second conjugation verbs, there is a long E before the RE. So the second principal part of monera looks like this, whereas the second principal part of amare, for example, looks like this. Amare has an A before the RE. Monera has a long E before the RE. An A before the RE in the second principal part makes this a first conjugation verb. A long E before the RE makes this a second conjugation verb. That pattern will hold true for every single word you can find in the dictionary. So now you know the difference between first conjugation verbs and second conjugation verbs. When you identify or deal with nouns, you have to know that nouns have case, number, and gender. A case ending, a number, that's singular or plural, and a gender, masculine, feminine, or neuter. Verbs are different. Verbs, instead of having case, number, and gender, verbs have mood, tense, voice, and most verbs, but not all, have person and number as well. So far, the book has only taught you the indicative, mood, present tense verbs in the active voice. Mood, tense, voice. And the book has also exposed you a little bit to the imperative, mood, present tense, active voice. All the jargon, all the names may be overwhelming. You've got to watch these podcasts, watch them more than once, and if the names aren't sticking, and if you're not taking notes that you can reread and make sense of, and if the book isn't helping you, you need to talk to me on Skype. I can probably clear it up for you, working one-on-one with you. But you need to understand the way that nouns are identified, which is case, number, and gender. That's the same way that adjectives are identified, case, number, and gender. Case is the ending, like nominative, genitive, dative, accusative, and ablative. Number is singular or plural. And gender is masculine, feminine, or neuter. But verbs have mood, tense, voice, and most of them also have person and number. The only two forms that you've been exposed to in the book so far are the indicative present active and the imperative present active. Those are the two types that you're expected to conjugate and translate at this point. So just as I did with the nouns and the adjectives, and I showed you a system of how to add their suffixes, now I want to show you the system for how to add the suffixes to a verb. The process of adding the suffixes for a verb is called conjugation. And first I'm going to teach you how to do the indicative mood, present tense, active voice. And just as with the nouns, we're only dealing with the first and second declension nouns, so with the verbs, we're only dealing with the first and second conjugation. All the other conjugations and all the other declensions we'll learn in later chapters and later lessons. They will very much follow the process outlined below. So again, I can't emphasize enough how important this lesson is and how important this chapter in the book is. A lot of your knowledge is going to go back to this lesson. You've got to get this one right. It's also an important quiz that you have this week, due by Sunday. And that'll be posted on Thursday, and you'll have until Sunday to take it, and you'll have 2 chances to take it, and you'll get the average of that score. But make sure you study and work hard on that one. It's going to be a good indicator of what you're going to know for the rest of the class. When you're going to conjugate a verb in the first or second conjugation, I'll show you what they look like in the dictionary. You might find a verb like amo, amari, amawi, amatum. That would be a first conjugation since it has an A before the RE and the second thing in the dictionary. Or it might look like moneo, monera, monui, monitum. That's what the second conjugation looks like. Note that it has the long E before the RE. So your first step is to take the second principal part, the second thing in the dictionary. In the case of amare, it would be amare. That's a R right there. I'll rewrite it for you. In the case of monea, it would be monera, the second thing in the dictionary written out in full. In both cases, you're going to drop the RE from the ending. And there you have the stem, or the theme. That's what you're going to work with to add the endings onto. Then for the first conjugation, you're going to add AMAO. Now this is the sole exception to this process. AMAO doesn't exist in Latin. The two vowels, when they come together, cancel each other out in effect, or essentially, and the A disappears. That's the sole exception to this process. It happens very much in English too. When two vowels come right next to each other, they're generally slurred together. You certainly don't pronounce, for example, the word L-O-O-K as if there's 2 O sounds in there. You don't say look, you say look. The 2 O's are slurred together as if they were one vowel sound. Same thing happens in Latin. It's very natural in most languages. The 2 vowels right next to each other, in many instances, not in all instances, will slur together and cancel each other out. So the AMA, which is what it should be, turns into AMO. That's the only exception you have to know so far. And that's good for a language. Languages have many exceptions, sometimes a frustrating amount, but so far Latin has been pretty consistent for you. So, in the second example, it's perfectly consistent. You take the AMA, after you drop the RE, and you add the S. You take the AMA, After you drop the RE and you add the T, the AMA is the theme or stem. The AMA is added to each of these different suffixes, and now you have conjugated the verb amo, amari, amawi, amatum. The first one, since this is the indicative present active, translates as I love. Sometimes you might want to translate that as I do love, or sometimes you might want to translate it as I am loving. But I urge you to keep it simple. Translate it as I love. The second one is you love. The third one is he, she, or it. It's up to you to choose. Sometimes it'll be obvious what the author intends, but it means all three, or it can mean all three. In each instance, you'll choose one, the one that's most appropriate, but it can mean all three. He, she, or it loves. Sorry for the A right there. And then the next one is we love. And then you plural. We can do it like this if you wish. It'll make it a little clearer. Y'all love. And then finally, they love. The different endings communicate to you which person and number it is. The first three are singulars, I, you, and he, she, and it. The second three, we, y'all, and they, are plurals. The suffixes ost, must, tis, ent indicate the person and the number. I pointed out to you that there's one exception in this process. You're supposed to take A-M-A-R-E, the second thing in the dictionary, and drop the R-E. That would give you AMA. I pointed out to you, and I'm reviewing for you now because it's so important, that in the first person singular only, the AMA plus the O yields AMO only. The A drops out. You'll see that occur a few more times during this class, where two vowels come together and the first one disappears. So get used to that irregularity. There is some regularity to that irregularity. There is some way to predict even the irregular things in Latin. You just have to be a careful student of the language. After that, it proceeds perfectly regularly. Amo, amas, amat, amamis, amatis, amant. Just one exception. The process would be exactly the same for moneo. You would take the second thing in the dictionary, monera. You would drop the RE. Now you have the theme or the stem, M-O-N with a long E. Then you would add the endings, M-O-N long E plus O. You would add the different suffixes, and this is the process of declension. Each suffix indicates the person and number. So you don't need to use the personal pronoun I in Latin. You can say, for example, ego moneo, but typically you can leave that off because it's not necessary information. It's just redundant and kind of emphatic. Moneo, just like amo, would be translated as I, warn in this case, because the verb means warn or advise. The second one would be you, warn. He, she, or it warns. We warn, or advise, or admonish. Y'all warn. And finally, they warn. Again, that pattern will always be like that. I, you, he, she, it, we, you, all, they. That's the pattern that language teachers generally use in all languages for the conjugation of verbs. What you just learned is the indicative. That's the mood. Present. Active. Conjugation of a first conjugation verb and a second conjugation verb. The pattern is the same with the slight exception for first conjugation verbs, all first conjugation verbs in the first person singular have the weird exception where they drop the A. It shouldn't really drop the A, but when people speak, they tend to do the same kind of lazy alterations to the language, and dropping the A when two vowels are together is a pretty universal and predictable occurrence. And here's Moneo written out. Type written out for you, nice and neat. Moneo, mones, monet, monemus, monetis, monent. The autocorrect functioned here. No need for that. Should be monent. Note that the long E is the characteristic of the second conjugation verb. The other type of verb that you know so far is the imperative mood, not the indicative, present active. What I just showed you was the indicative present active. Now you're learning the imperative present active. And again, we'll start just with the first and second conjugation verbs. You'll learn the third conjugation verbs, third I conjugation verbs, and fourth conjugation verbs later. The process is largely the same for the indicative present active and the imperative present active. The first thing that you want to do is take the second principal part. So if you have a verb like habito, habitare, habitavi, and habitatum, I don't even need to write out the fourth principal part because you don't need it, and I ran out of space. If you find this in the dictionary and you need to conjugate the imperative present active, you know that you're going to start with the second thing in the dictionary, and you know now that because this has an A before the RE, that this is a first conjugation, but it would be the same process for a second conjugation. You take the second thing in the dictionary. You would write out that form without any kind of abbreviation, habitare. You would drop the RE, and then for the imperative, you would add not the same suffixes. You would add nothing, leave it just as it is, for example, and you would add te. That's it. You've conjugated the entire verb. In the imperative, you can only do the second person singular and the second person plural. You can't do I, you can't do he, she, or it, you can't do we, and you can't do they. In the imperative, you can only conjugate habita and habitate. The first one would be translated like this. I command you, live. It would be the second person singular. The second person plural would look basically the same in English. I command you guys, live. The difference is that one is singular and one is plural. The same example would occur for amare. You would take the second thing in the dictionary, amare, you would drop the RE. You would add nothing to that stem. That would mean the second person singular. Or you would add te. Sorry, there's a typo there again. You would add te, which would be the second person plural, and that would mean love in the plural. Love or love. Very difficult to translate into English. As you note right here, I translate this one as love, exclamation point, and love, exclamation point. Your book will often do the same thing with the imperative. Use an exclamation point to make it clear that it's a command. But there's very little distinction in English between the second person singular subject, hey you, love, and the second person plural, hey y'all, love. It's awkward to do it out of context, but you get the point. One has the no ending and one has a te ending. Either add nothing to the stem or the theme, or add te to the stem in order to conjugate the imperative present active. If you did that for a second conjugation verb, for example, empleo, emplera, and then of course there would be a third and a fourth principal part that are of no interest to us right now. You would take the same thing, you would take the second principal part, everything else is meaningless to you. You would drop the RE again, and then you would add nothing to the end, or you would add TE to the end. That's how you conjugate the imperative present active for the second conjugation. So it would be in play or implata. This would mean fill, and this one would mean fill. But of course, the second one would be referring to two people or more, and the first one would be referring to just one person. As far as the lesson in the textbook, the lesson teaches you on page 29. It points out, starting with structure as usual, it points out that the second thing in the dictionary that I've been talking about, for example, amare, you can define that as the infinitive, and that's all the book calls it, although properly it is the infinitive present active. That would be the third total verb form that you know how to conjugate now. You know the indicative present active, and you know the imperative present active. The second thing in the dictionary, all by itself without doing anything to it, is instantaneously the infinitive present active. And the way that you translate it is to love. Whatever the verb is, you add to in front of it. So the book gives the example of laudare. That would be the second thing in the dictionary for this verb. Laudo, laudari, laudavi, laudatum. Second thing in the dictionary is translated as to praise. If the verb were vocare, it's translated as to call. If it were a second conjugation, habera, it would be translated as to have. So that's a pretty simple point. You need to understand that the second thing in the dictionary is called the infinitive present active. That's the mood, tense, and voice. The infinitive does not have person and number. It just has mood, tense, and voice. You do not need to conjugate it. You just need to find it in the dictionary. The infinitive present active is used to conjugate the indicative and used to conjugate the imperative, but it's also an entity in and of itself, and it needs no conjugation because it has no person and number. It always is translated as to love, to call, to have, to praise, to teach, to owe, to call. There's nothing to it beyond that. The next point of the book is that there are certain times when the infinitive, that second thing in the dictionary, is used as a so-called complementary infinitive. Complementary with an E means that it fulfills the meaning of another verb. In particular, it fulfills the verb of desire or obligation. For example, if you have a verb like desidero, I desire, it needs to be completed with another verb. The other verb in English, as in Latin, is going to be in the infinitive present active. I desire, for example, to call the girl. The name for this infinitive in this context, when it follows a verb of desiring or obligation, is called a complementary infinitive. You can also have, for example, the verb debeo. I ought to praise. You have to complement or complete the idea of debeo, I ought, with a complementary infinitive. To praise. To call. To have. The infinitive is always translated as to do something. And after certain verbs, like verbs of desiring or obligation, you have to complete the idea. Another one that the book doesn't get into yet is possum. I am able. And then you would follow it with a complementary infinitive. I am able, amare. I am able to love the girl. This verb has to be followed by a complementary infinitive, a verb that ends in re in this case when it's in the present. This is the second thing in the dictionary. I'm able to love, or I ought to praise, or I ought to call. Those are uses of the infinitive. The next lesson in the book shows you that you ought to drop the re of the infinitive in order to find its so-called stem. That's something that I've already mentioned to you. In order to find the stem of an infinitive, or the stem of a verb, you take the infinitive, which is the second thing in the dictionary, and you drop the re. Now you can form the indicative present active or the imperative present active. Next, the book tells you on page 29, the very bottom page, it says, talks about the personal endings. It talks about the present tense indicative, which we've already done. I refer to it as the indicative present active. The book points out to you that the indicative mood, which I have not defined for you per se, the indicative mood is used for an assertion about reality. That's the best definition for why a verb is categorized as being in the indicative. It's an assertion about reality. The book describes it as a state, the indicative mood is used to state a fact or to inquire whether something is a fact. I don't think that's an accurate definition, because you can use the indicative, for example, to state an opinion. I can say to you in the indicative mood, in Latin or in English, it's very hot out today. But you might think that it's cold. We may totally disagree, and yet I can speak in the indicative. So the indicative is not used merely for facts. It's used for assertions or claims about reality. You can also lie using the indicative. You can say that last night I was out bowling. And you could state that in Latin in the indicative even though it isn't true, even though it's not a fact. So I disagree strongly with the book when the book claims that the indicative is used for statements of fact. That's a common definition, but it's not complete. The truth is, the indicative is used for an assertion about reality, and you can also ask a question in the indicative. Your question, again, would question an assertion about reality. Is it hot today? Would be a statement that's in the indicative. It's a question, and it's questioning a claim about reality. Where were you last night? You're questioning reality. You're questioning someone's claim about reality. You're asking a question about what really happened. You may not get the right answer, but you're asking that question in the indicative. And you can state a statement of fact in the indicative for sure. You can say, my name is Sean. That's in the indicative. You can state facts. The Trojan War happened around the year 1184 BC. Again, that's a statement of fact, arguably, but it doesn't need to be necessarily true. It's any kind of assertion about reality. I think I've gone on long enough about that, but it's just a minor point I want to correct from what the book says. The book goes on page 30 to talk about the personal endings, which we've already done for the indicative present active. OST, mus, tis, and ent. Those are the endings for the indicative present active. You do need to memorize those endings as the book admonishes you. Then the book gives you a very important lesson about the irregular verb. The irregular verb to be. The irregular verb to be has principal parts that start out looking like this. Then it gets really irregular, and I won't even continue after that because it doesn't even fit into the pattern that you've learned so far. So the verb to be is highly irregular, just like in English. And the conjugation does not follow the pattern that I taught you in the indicative present active. The best way to handle the verb to be in the indicative present active is to memorize it. You're going to see it a lot, so you'll have lots of practice with it. The conjugation looks like this. Sum means I am. S means you are. You can already see that the pattern has been broken. We're not starting with the second principal part. We're not adding OST, must, tis, ent to it so far. This is not an O, obviously. The root for this is SU. The root for this is ES. There's no RE to drop in the second principal part. The verb is a mess. It's an irregular verb, and it's one of relatively few. And you just need to memorize this. Sum es est. He, she, or it is. Sumus. Estis. And sunt. We are. Y'all are. And finally, they are. I cannot help you more with that one than just asking you to memorize it. You can see the model on page 30 in the book. Sum es est, sumus estis sunt. Say it out loud. Practice it. Write it out. And master this verb immediately. As usual, the second thing in the dictionary is translated to be. That doesn't change. That's not irregular. The infinitive present active of the verb sum esse is esse, and it's translated as to be. It just doesn't conjugate in the normal pattern, and you have to memorize that as an irregular verb. The next point in the book, on page 30 at the very bottom, is the indirect object for the dative case. We already talked about that last time. For example, if you're looking at a first declension noun like puella, puellae in the genitive singular, puellae in the dative singular. Puellae, I described the translation of it. The best translation of the dative is to or for. So, for example, this would say to the girl or to a girl. Remember, you can pick either one in Latin because neither the or a is ever indicated. But the dative singular would say to the girl or to a girl, whichever one sounds more natural in the sentence. You could also try for the girl or for a girl. Basically 4 options, even just for the singular. And then you just have to decide what sounds best in the sentence. So, for example, if you say, I give flowers, or I give a gift, let's say, I give a gift, you might want to choose to the girl. Although it doesn't sound illogical to say, I give a gift for the girl. It just doesn't sound quite as smooth or like natural English. So the dative is best translated as to or for, whether it's in the singular or the plural. Master that conjugation. If you look at the conjugation of the plural, it's no different as far as how you translate it. It's just a different case ending. Whereas the singular has an AE on the ending, the dative plural has an IS, but you would still translate it as to or for. It would just be in the plural. So you would say to the girls or for the girls. in the dative plural. You add an S, by the way. You can see the S on this dative plural. That may help you remember how to do the dative plural. For the dative you've already seen in the last lesson, it's simply translated as to or for in most examples. The book gives the example as Minerva gives wisdom to the girl. She also gives the example in the book, I ought to show my pictures to the nymphs. When you have to or for, that's a dative case ending. The next thing the book goes into is the ablative, page 31 now. It talks about the ablative case being used as the object of the preposition. It's not the object of every preposition, but it is the object of the majority of prepositions. I'll eventually ask you to memorize the list of the prepositions. I can give it to you now just orally. It's nothing for you to write down, but so you can hear the amount of prepositions. It's cum, in, de, ex, ab, pro, sine, super, sub, coram. About 10 prepositions are the ones that are followed by the ablative case ending. Those prepositions will help you translate the ablative. For example, if you have cum puella, it means with, because cum means with, a girl, or with the girl. If you have in Europa, it's very easy to translate that in the ablative as in Europe. If you have de vita or de vita, that would translate as about the life. Prepositions indicate location in time or space. With the girl, about the life, in Europe. The list of prepositions you'll eventually have to memorize is short. It's only about 10, but the book is only pointing out to you now that the ablative case is used most often as the object of a list of about 10 prepositions. A tricky little note about Latin is that you'll often see the preposition cum put at the end of a word. The book gives the example me cum as one word. It's all joined together and smushed together. It's really originally two words, the word me and the word cum. If you look at page 31, right under number 28, at the bottom where cum is bolded, it says cum with a pronoun object is reversed in order and the two words are joined together. There's no space between the words me and cum, and you translate it not literally as me with, because obviously that's awkward, but with me. So the example in the sentence might say, the girl was traveling me cum, but you would translate that as the girl was traveling with me. Even though the Latin word order is reversed from what English says, me cum, me with, you translate it obviously as good English, with me. Next point, number 29 on page 31 is the imperative mood. I've already given you a lesson on the imperative present active, which is all the book is rehashing. The imperative present active is used for commands, and the book shows you the difference between the singular and the plural. The singular has no ending, specta, once you drop the RE off from the second thing in the dictionary, whereas the plural adds the TE as an ending. Both of them are commanding someone to look. The specta is commanding the second person singular, you singular to look. Spectate is commanding the second person plural, or you all to look. The next point on that page, number 30, page 31, point number 30, or number 30 in the book, is the vocative case ending. This is a case ending that you have not learned so far in your declension of nouns or adjectives. The vocative case ending is not a common one when you read Roman literature, but you do need to be aware of it. The book has not taught it to you right away for good reason. I agree with that, because it is not the most common case ending. And the other interesting thing about the vocative, is that it often looks exactly like the nominative. So there's another reason that it's not a priority when you're learning this language at first, to learn the vocative case ending. Nonetheless, you should know something about the vocative case ending. Like the nominative, genitive, dative, accusative, and ablative, there is a singular and a plural vocative, and you add a certain suffix onto the stem in order to conjugate a word in the vocative singular or the vocative plural. The application of the vocative voice is the direct address of someone. So what the vocative is used for is when you want to speak to someone. It's a funny thing because you don't do it in English, but it's used when you want to directly address someone. So look at the examples in the book on page 31. It says, te puella temeria dulcera tempto. It says, you, rash girl, I'm attempting to teach. You, girl, it's a funny thing that we don't do very much in English, and you certainly don't change the ending of the noun in English when you directly address someone. Look at the other example in the book, the next one. It says, portate nymphae, that's the plural vocative, portate nymphae. It says, carry, nymphs, carry the looms here, nymphs. You're directly addressing the nymphs. Hey, nymphs, carry the looms over here. Hey, you, girl, I'm trying to teach you. Hey, you, rash girl, I'm trying to teach you. It's the ending that you add to a word if you're yelling at someone. Hey, guy. Hey, Caesar. Hey, friend. Look at the third example in the book. It says salvete discipuli. That says greetings, students. You don't think of adding a different ending or changing an ending in English at all when you speak to someone. But when you say, hello, friend, or what's happening, neighbor, you have to add a different ending in Latin. It's called the vocative ending. It's pretty rare, as you can imagine, in literature. When you're reading serious literature in Latin, you're not going to find a lot of vocatives. Nonetheless, you do have to be aware of it because it shows up occasionally. The vocative ending that you have to be aware of so far is in the first declension only. In the first declension, the nominative and the vocative are exactly the same. That's not true for the later declensions, but so far the book takes it slow. For the first declension, the vocative is going to look exactly the same as the nominative. You'll be able to distinguish it because it's the direct address to someone. The final point that is new for you in this chapter is on page 32. You'll see that point number 31 on page 32 is this word que. It's referred to as an enclitic, which means it's attached to the end of a word. This is a funny one too, just like that cum. The enclitic que is attached to the end of a word. So look at the first example in the book. It says, nymphae puellamque. The que is really a separate word. but it's added just like that previous example of cum to the end of a word, smushed together on the end of it, and then the rest of the sentence continues, picturas spectant. So this sentence would translate as, the nymphs and the maidens, or the nymphs and the girls, look at pictures. The weird thing about Quay is that it's translated into English before the word that it goes at the end of. Do you see what I mean here? So this one says, the nymphs and, Quay means and the girls, sorry, I spelled girls wrong in my reproduction here. The nymphs and the girls, they look at pictures in the accusative. Even though Quay comes at the end of puella, in English it's translated before puella. Look at the second example, it's the same thing. It says, puella se laudant, clamat Quay, me doceo. So it says, the girl, puella, I spelled this one wrong too. Sloppy. Puella se laudat, the girl praises herself and shouts. I teach myself. The word Quay is translated in English before the word that it comes at the end of. The girl praises herself and Quay shouts. I teach myself. It's a funny word the way that it's actually applied. The book has a third example. Dea, pulchra, superbaque, in terra ambulat. So it says, the goddess, Dea, the goddess, beautiful pulchra, and powerful or proud superba, walks on earth. The goddess, beautiful and superior, beautiful and proud, walks on the earth. The Quay is translated before the word in English that it comes at the end of in Latin. You'll get used to that as you see the examples and practice them. The last point on page 32, point number 32, is the principal parts of verbs. I've already taught you them. There are 4 principal parts of the verbs abbreviated in the book, but they write them out in full on page 32, and you need to learn how to decipher the abbreviation and memorize every principal part. That may seem daunting at first. Once you learn the patterns of the first and second conjugation principal parts, it will go faster and faster and faster. Porto, portari, portavi, portatas, portata, portatam is the abbreviation the book uses. You need to memorize the principal parts for every single verb you come across in this class, period. If you don't, the class will become progressively more impossible. It might not seem like you need to do it at first. You can just flip back to the vocabulary page. That will not work for you as you progress in this class. It's typical standard practice. I'm not asking you to do anything strange or bizarre when I ask you to memorize every single principal part you come across. And you'll learn as you go that once you learn 5 or 10 of them, the rest of them become very, very easy because it's a regular pattern. That will help you with your language and your pattern recognition for this class. That's the end of this podcast. I hope it was clear and consolidated a lot of the important information. Please contact me on Skype if it's not. Many of you email me, and you've not asked me difficult grammar questions by email, which I appreciate because it'll be too difficult to do it like that. Call me up on Skype. We can type back and forth and talk back and forth, and that'll help iron out any of the problems. Right now is a major turning point in the class. Get this information down very well, and the rest of the class should be pretty easy. Thanks. This is me saying bye.